like to welcome all of you to the fourth meeting of the CSMI Planning Group for Lake Superior. This is a planning group for the work that's going to occur in 2021 out on the lake. And I really appreciate everybody's attendance here because this is a very busy time of year for field sampling, as we all know, and also summer vacations that people like to take when the weather's decent. Unfortunately, we're missing a lot of our Ontario contingent from the province. Unfortunately, they have some travel restrictions on right now, and we do continue to need to remember them when we're doing our planning. And also the eastern part of the lake is not as represented as we would hope, and we want to remember them as well. So since I'm the first speaker, I guess I have to introduce myself. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Don Schreiner, and I am basically retired from the Department of Natural Resources. And you're probably saying, well, what is he doing here? Well, I'm also doing some part-time work with Minnesota Sea Grant, and I'm doing some part-time volunteering with Minnesota Sea Grant. And it's been really fun to kind of keep my fingers in. I see a lot of familiar faces out here and keep visiting with folks. So my real career was spending 35 years with the Department of Natural Resources. The last 25 years was managing the fisheries out here on Lake Superior. I was just up the road in French River. And I tell people that it seems like I work half of my time for the state of Minnesota and half time for the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, which basically facilitates fisheries management around all the Great Lakes. And with each of the lakes, there's a fisheries technical committee made up of the biologists on the lake. And I guess since we're talking about monitoring here, one of the main things, one of our main jobs within the technical committee is monitoring lake trout populations, sea lamprey populations, and prey populations. And one of the things we have going is a very long-term monitoring program for lake trout and sea lamprey. And each of the agencies do the same sampling around the lake each year, and we've got almost a 60-year history now on lake trout and sea lamprey interactions. So that's kind of one of the, I think, longest time series that we have. Pre-CSMI, I was invited to, I think it was actually a workshop to work on CSMI issues. And I was asked to give a presentation on how can you keep a long-term monitoring program in place for so long. The three things I can remember from that time was that first, you really need a practical, applied reason to monitor. And you need to be able to make sure that the agencies, the public, and the staff that are doing the monitoring buy in to that monitoring program. Secondly, what works well for us was that we had multiple partners. And as everybody in the room knows, each one of these agencies go through budget squeezes at times, and monitoring programs tend to drop off. But it's the peer pressure of collaborative agencies that basically kept a lot of these programs going. And I don't think we missed any years within those 60 years by any of the agencies. And the third main point, I think, to keep continuous monitoring going is the need to report the monitoring results in easy to understand practical terms and then use those results for some sort of management activity. I think it's really important that that happens. So those were some of the points I covered, and I would think that during the next couple of days here that those should be things people would think about when they're proposing priorities for monitoring. The other thing I wanted to talk about was just one example of a monitoring program we got going kind of on a shoestring. And this occurred in 1996. It was actually a Lake Superior Technical Committee meeting down in Canal Park. It was a winter meeting. Jim Kitchell, who's a fisheries biologist, ecosystem biologist, came up from Madison, Wisconsin, and he had two bright, shiny, new postdocs Many people in the room will recognize the names of Doran Mason and Tim Johnson. And they were looking for a food web type project to work on, and we had found some real imbalances between our estimates of predator and prey in Lake Superior based on some of our early modeling. So we got together. Jim was willing to put the expertise on a vessel. We found that the USGS vessels at the time USGS was going through a budget crunch. They were able to do their typical spring survey, but the boats we were told they would be tied up for the rest of the year. We couldn't hardly fathom that. So we got together, and Minnesota DNR volunteered to put fuel in the boats. Wisconsin DNR volunteered to feed the crews. Mike Hansen was in charge of the vessels and agreed to use the USGS vessel along with the crews. Jim put his people on board, and we started an acoustic survey in the Western Arm. And I think there were probably 3 or 4 peer-reviewed papers that came out of that survey. And also, more importantly, we started an acoustic survey on a lake-wide basis. And now, I think every one of the agencies has acoustic equipment and does surveys around the lake. So, you know, for a small amount of money, but a lot of collaboration, we were able to move forward a lot of the information out there. So I encourage you to think about that too. Not everybody here is going to get money to do more work. Hopefully they would, but it never works out that way. So I think that, you know, just working together, we could probably make some real headway. Speaking of working together, I wanted to go through the agenda. So the agenda is a little bit different than maybe some of the other workshops you've attended. We'll start out this morning with a number of presentations and overviews and some keynote speakers. And then after a few words from our mayor, hopefully, we'll break into 3 different theme groups. And the first theme group will be physical integrity and nutrients, and that will be in the afternoon. The second theme group is the biological integrity, and the third is chemical and emerging issues. So each one of these theme groups will be run, the process will be run in a similar manner. We'll start out with a keynote speaker. They'll spend about 20 or 30 minutes kind of summarizing the issues, and then we'll have a panel with 4 or 5 people, each giving just a 5-minute presentation. So it's kind of like a lightning round or a mini presentation. And then at the end of all those presentations, there will be some time for questions. They're not there to give you a full-blown description of their research, but just to get you thinking about what you might want to talk about when you move to small groups. And that's going to be basically the meat of the meeting here. And all of you will be involved in that. And so hopefully in those small groups you'll be able to answer some of the questions that are posed, but also get creative if there's some things that you want to talk about, you want to get on the agenda. That will be your time to do it. And each one of these theme areas will be run similarly. And then once those are done, we'll come back as a big group and go over what folks have talked about. So the last thing, well, second to the last thing I wanted to do is just go through on the very top of your agenda some of the outcomes for the workshop. And you can read those as easily as I can, but we had 4 major outcomes. And the first was trying to understand what information gaps exist in the science and monitoring program for Lake Superior. Second would be try to identify what priorities are out there that we would want to work on in the next go-round in 2021. And then, as I mentioned with my example, we tried to enhance some collaborative opportunities out there, whether there's funding or not, for some of the programs that we have. And then lastly, we hope to come out of this with a workshop summary and publish that. And that should be available hopefully at the end of September, so folks can see in a very concise manner what was discussed. Before I end, I want to recognize Sharon Moen, who actually organized all this, got us all together. and talked us into doing things we don't normally do. And she has done a very good job of that. Also, we have 3 facilitators, Jesse Schomburg, Cindy Hagley, and Hillary Sorensen. Jesse and Cindy are from Sea Grant, and Hillary is from the National Estuary Research Reserve on the St. Louis River. And most importantly, before I end here, I want to ask all of you to engage with some of our student helpers here. We've got a lot of great help from our graduate students, and I would ask that you basically talk to them about your research. They're here to learn about Lake Superior, some of the work that you're doing. I'd encourage you to ask them about their work because they have a lot to share as well. These folks are really excellent, at least from what I've seen so far, and they are basically the next generation of people working in the science programs, and we want to keep the best scientists on Lake Superior since it is the biggest and best of the Great Lakes.